Excuses can act like a blanket, offering comfort when uncertainty arises. They give you a reason to delay, to put off the ambitions you once felt so passionately about. You may tell yourself there's not enough time, the conditions aren't right, or the resources just aren't there. Yet these same explanations can quietly chip away at your drive, keeping you in a cycle of inaction far longer than you ever intended. Once you awaken to the idea that every excuse is rooted in fear or indecision, you begin to see the cost of letting them run your choices. By acknowledging that many of these barriers exist only in your head, you set the stage to move from stalling to starting, from intention to consistent follow-through. There's a subtle power in admitting that real action is possible right now, despite whatever incomplete circumstances you believe you face. Perhaps the biggest shift is deciding that small, messy attempts are better than waiting for perfect conditions. In that single decision, you rewrite your approach to each day, choosing progress over hesitation. You let each step you take, no matter how minor, break the hold excuses have on you. Before long, you realize that all those reasons you thought you needed to wait were just illusions, because as soon as you commit to acting, momentum appears. And once momentum's on your side, the line between dreaming and doing begins to blur, allowing you to accomplish within a week what might otherwise have lingered on a wish list forever. Excuses often arise from the gap between the life you envision and the comfort of your current habits. It can be tempting to cling to reasons why it's never the right time. You might tell yourself the schedule is too cramped, your skill set too limited, or your support system too weak. Yet beneath these rationalizations often lie deeper fears of failure, of judgment, or even of success itself. Addressing these unspoken worries head-on is a pivotal step in moving from endless postponement to consistent effort. By naming the fears at play, you begin to see that excuses are frequently just camouflage, shielding you from the vulnerability of truly trying. Sometimes these avoidance mechanisms show up in subtle ways. Perhaps you commit to tasks you don't truly value, leaving no room for the projects that ignite your passion. Or you might spend hours organizing minor details, convincing yourself you're making progress while sidestepping the core challenge. This pattern can continue indefinitely if not disrupted. Days turn into weeks, and those heartfelt goals remain stuck. Yet the moment you decide to be brutally honest with yourself, asking, am I hiding behind this small busy work because I'm afraid of the real project? You unlock a chance to break free. That honesty pierces through illusions and helps you refocus on the tasks that truly matter. Another culprit that fuels excuses is the myth of ideal conditions. You might daydream about an uninterrupted block of days or the perfect synergy of resources and motivation, believing that only then will you truly start. This outlook can leave you perpetually waiting for a moment that never arrives. Real action typically takes root in imperfect circumstances, in the midst of life's daily pressures, messy schedules, and sporadic energies. When you accept that you can begin even with partial clarity and limited time, you grant yourself permission to make incremental progress. Each small step leads to the next, and you grow more capable by navigating real-world constraints rather than fantasizing about a perfectly orchestrated future. Momentum is another factor that can transform good intentions into tangible results, but it can stall if excuses creep in at the wrong time. Imagine you finally gather your courage to start a project. Maybe you block off a few hours on a weekend or decide to wake up earlier each day. If you yield to the first excuse that appears, that hard-won burst of determination dissipates. However, if you push past the initial discomfort, you discover that action can be surprisingly self-sustaining. You see a hint of progress, a first draft written, a plan mapped out, and that taste of movement fuels the next phase. Soon, you're reminded that the biggest hurdle was simply getting started, and having crossed that threshold, the path becomes clearer. Accountability, whether self-imposed or shared, often marks the difference between an idea that fizzles and one that flourishes. It's much easier to invent excuses if you keep your goals private, never expressing them to someone who might check in on your progress. When you publicly commit, even if it's just telling a friend you'll complete a certain task by week's end, you add a layer of motivation. The fear of looking inconsistent can be enough to push you through a bout of laziness or doubt. That said, accountability thrives on sincerity. If you're just putting on a show for external validation, you may revert to excuses as soon as no one's looking. True accountability emerges when you're willing to be transparent about your stumbles and still keep going. When confronting a daunting goal, breaking it into bite-sized tasks is crucial to dissolving excuses. A mountain of responsibility can paralyze you with its enormity. But if you isolate a sliver of the project that you can handle today, maybe it's drafting a single paragraph or contacting one potential ally, you convert an abstract ambition into a concrete step. The mind is more likely to agree, yes, I can do that now, than to commit to something massive all at once. You repeat this process daily, carving out manageable pieces, and each completed piece not only drives progress, but chips away at the excuses that feed on overwhelm. A parallel approach to chunking tasks is identifying your prime working style, so you tackle high-resistance tasks during periods of peak energy. Some people are sharpest in the early morning, others in the late evening. By aligning crucial steps, like writing important emails or outlining a complicated proposal, with your natural energy, you reduce the friction that excuses can exploit. If you're drowsy or mentally drained, any reason to delay can feel valid. But if you schedule critical tasks when you're awake and focused, you shrink the window in which excuses can flourish. This simple tweak can yield immediate improvements. The same hour of effort can achieve significantly more if you match it with your body and mind's rhythm. Temptations and distractions spur excuses by offering an easy escape when a task gets challenging. Whether it's tidying a workspace, indulging in a hobby, or checking if there's a quick errand you can run, your brain loves to rationalize these detours. Declaring specific periods as no excuse zones can combat this impulse. You decide that for 1 hour you won't pivot to any diversion unless it's a true emergency. Keeping a simple notepad to capture random to-dos or ideas that pop up prevents them from derailing your immediate focus. When that hour is up, you can briefly assess those side thoughts. This method lowers the allure of impulsive rationalizations because you've created a boundary in which your primary project has unconditional priority. Excuses lose their grip when you develop a bias toward action in your daily mindset. This shift entails consistently choosing to act where possible, writing that email now, making that call promptly, or opening that research material immediately rather than postponing. You train your brain to respond, "Let's do it," whenever it registers hesitation. Each time you override the impulse to delay, you fortify a habit of execution. Over a week, these seemingly minor decisions add up, leaving you with a track record of completed tasks rather than a backlog. At the same time, you start to build a reputation in your own eyes as someone who gets things done. That self-image becomes a fortress against the usual reasons you might come up with to postpone. It's worth noting that not all excuses are baseless. Sometimes genuine constraints exist. You might truly lack certain resources or face unavoidable obligations. The difference lies in whether you adapt to these constraints or let them become reasons to halt completely. If a legitimate obstacle stands in your way, you can scale the project back or find a short-term workaround instead of shelving the goal entirely. This approach keeps you in motion even if the steps are smaller than you'd ideally like. By refusing to let a partial blockage transform into a full stop, you maintain momentum and respect the reality that some hurdles require time to overcome. Confidence often flourishes in that gray zone where conditions aren't perfect, but you push forward anyway. Each victory, even if modest, proves you can progress under less than ideal circumstances. That creates a feedback loop. The more you see yourself acting despite imperfections, the less tempting it is to hide behind excuses next time. This new self-image and person who proceeds regardless of minor or moderate setbacks becomes a powerful counterweight against old habits of avoidance. As you accumulate these small successes, you reduce the intimidation factor of future challenges. Another thread in moving from excuses to execution is learning to say no to what doesn't align with your real priorities. A great deal of procrastination arises when you take on tasks or commitments that don't serve your key objectives, then feel overwhelmed and push the important stuff aside. The more comfortable you become with respectfully declining demands that don't match your goals, the fewer excuses you'll generate for neglecting the pursuits that do matter. That shift might feel uncomfortable initially, especially if you're used to pleasing others or maintaining a busy schedule just to appear productive. But once you enforce boundaries, you free up energy and attention for the goals you've been postponing. Reflection is another potent mechanism for shrinking excuses. Many people rush from one commitment to the next without pausing to question whether they're spending their time productively. A quick daily or weekly check-in asking, which of my actions today moved me closer to my top goals and which served as convenient avoidance, can be eye-opening. You might realize you spent hours reorganizing minor details while ignoring a crucial phone call. Once you see these patterns, you can plan better for tomorrow, deciding to tackle the high-resistance but high-impact task first. Over multiple reflections, you refine your workflow to target the root of your procrastination, dismantling it piece by piece. Embracing the concept of start messy, refine later, helps diffuse the excuse that you're not ready yet. If you insist on having every detail perfect before you begin, you offer your mind endless opportunities to justify more delays. By allowing a rough first iteration, whether it's a sketch of your idea, a casual conversation to explore possibilities, or a trial run of a new skill, you break the ice of inaction. These rough starts can look unpolished, but they generate momentum and new information. That information, in turn, guides your next steps, helping you see what truly needs improving instead of guessing. Rewards and positive reinforcement, even in small doses, can propel you from thought to action. You might promise yourself a simple treat or a relaxing break after tackling a task you've dreaded. While external motivators might not be the ultimate solution, they can ease the initial push. As you collect these modest wins, your mind starts associating effort with a sense of achievement and relief rather than with intimidation. Eventually, the real reward becomes the progress itself. But a small incentive can help bridge that gap in the early stages. There's power in visualizing the immediate consequences of continued excuses. If you fast forward a few months, still spinning the same story, no time, not enough know-how, what opportunities will you have lost? This flash forward can be unsettling, but motivating. Realizing that your future self might be in the same place with the same regrets can spark a sense of urgency. You begin to see that every day you delay is a day you're not investing in your own growth or the outcomes you envision. Sometimes that realization is the push needed to say, I'd rather deal with imperfections now than with years of missed chances. Cultivating a circle of driven people can dissolve your usual justifications for stalling. When you're around people who regularly set and meet goals, normalizing progress becomes simpler. Their approach to challenges, focusing on solutions rather than reasons not to act, rubs off on you, reinforcing that it's possible to juggle life's demands and still move forward. These peers or mentors can provide a mirror for your excuses, calling them out gently or showing how they've tackled similar constraints. This camaraderie counteracts the isolation that often lets excuses multiply unchecked. A final step in dismantling excuses is designing a realistic but structured schedule that builds accountability into each day. If you commit to spending the first hour after waking on your main project and you log your actions in a simple journal, you create a system that reveals whether you're following through. If you miss that slot and fill it with trivialities, you see the pattern in black and white. That visibility can prompt quicker corrections. Over time, the routine of doing that first hour consistently undermines your ability to say, I don't have time, because you've already devoted a daily block. Building on that consistency, you eventually stop waiting for bursts of motivation and lean into the rhythm you've created. Action becomes less about grand gestures and more about the steady pattern you repeat daily. This shift might feel unremarkable at first, just a few hours blocked off in a calendar or a few small tasks completed before other obligations begin. But within a week, you can see significant changes. Tasks that once lingered in the realm of I'll get to it someday now have a foothold in real progress. And you recognize that your schedule is no longer a jumbled list of half-completed intentions. When you do face a moment of hesitation, reminding yourself of past accomplishments can jolt you back into motion. Sometimes the mind forgets how capable you've been in earlier instances, focusing instead on any immediate discomfort or challenge. By recalling a time you overcame a similar block, I managed that project despite feeling unprepared, or I resolved that conflict even though it seemed daunting. You reassure yourself that you're no stranger to pressing forward in adverse conditions. This recollection can be as brief as a 30-second reflection, yet it undercuts the voice that insists you can't handle the current obstacle. Deeper than any single tactic is the realization that excuses often stem from an underlying narrative about who you are and what you deserve. Maybe you believe you're too disorganized to accomplish a complex goal, or you think your environment is too limiting. Each time you feed that narrative, you give yourself reasons not to push harder. On the other hand, each act of execution, no matter how small, chips away at the notion that you're stuck or inadequate. You start rewriting the story of what you're capable of, which can lift the weight of self-imposed limitations. Visual aids can help reinforce this new story. Some keep a simple chart where they mark an X for every day they meet their primary objective, creating a chain of consecutive accomplishments. Others prefer a quick journal entry summarizing what they accomplished that day, plus a note on how it felt. With each marked success, you see evidence that you don't need more excuses. Failure to execute stands out plainly, but so do your wins, and that balanced visibility keeps you honest. Before long, you find motivation in not wanting to break your streak of consistent action. One important point is to expect and accept missteps. Even with the best systems, you may drop the ball occasionally. Maybe you skip a day or let fear override your plan. If you treat that slip as proof you're doomed, you open the door for excuses to come roaring back. If you treat it as a brief detour, you can correct course quickly. The difference between those who succeed and those who languish in excuses often boils down to how they respond to setbacks. A single lapse doesn't define your capacity or your destiny. It simply highlights an area to improve. Bounce back the next day, reaffirm your plan, and move forward with renewed resolve. The physical environment plays a role in enabling action. If your workspace or living area is cluttered with distractions, you make it easy for excuses to slip in whenever focus gets tough. A 5-minute tidying session or an intentional rearrangement of your workspace can make a surprising difference. By removing the objects or triggers that typically lead to procrastination, like a comfy chair that lures you into daydreaming, you reduce the friction of staying on task. Sometimes a small adjustment, such as facing your desk away from a distracting view, can boost the likelihood you'll act on your goals. Peer pressure, when used positively, can further cement a no-excuse approach. Team up with a friend or colleague who has similar goals and pledge to report your progress each evening. This collaboration transforms your personal mission into a shared journey. You cheer each other on, occasionally swapping tips and short reminders to stay on track. The knowledge that someone else is rooting for you and expecting an update can push you to power through moments where you'd otherwise say, "I'll do it tomorrow." Rather than fostering competition, this synergy often breeds mutual success as each partner's small triumph energizes the other. Action becomes simpler when you remove the illusion that big leaps happen out of nowhere. Those who seem to make dramatic progress typically undergo steady but consistent improvement behind the scenes. Break down any impressive achievement, and you'll often find a string of daily or weekly tasks carried out without fail. By focusing on that daily grind, delivering small results repeatedly, you replicate the same pattern. Excuses struggle to survive in the face of a well-chosen routine because each day's tasks feel too small to justify major reasons for delay, yet too essential to skip. Another effective tactic is to mentally rehearse how you'll respond when an excuse surfaces. Think about it. You anticipate that at some point you'll feel too tired or uncertain, so you plan a short pep talk for yourself. I promised to dedicate half an hour to this task tonight, so let me get started. If it's awful after half an hour, I can stop. Often, simply beginning breaks the hold of reluctance, and you find enough momentum to finish. Having that prepared script shuts down impulsive rationalization before it settles in. An intentional approach to rest keeps your energy balanced for sustained action. When you slip into random guilt-laden breaks, wandering off without purpose, the rest rarely refreshes you. On the other hand, scheduling short, mindful pauses can recharge you better, ensuring you return to tasks with sharper focus. If you commit to, say, a 15-minute reading session or a short walk, you experience a cleaner break that revitalizes you, removing the excuse that you're simply too drained to continue. The key is clarity, choosing how to rest instead of letting fatigue or boredom decide. It's important to watch out for that perfectionism angle, an excuse that masquerades as high standards. If you tell yourself you won't start because you don't have the perfect plan, you give your mind permission to procrastinate indefinitely. The truth is, your plan will evolve once you're in motion. Even a half-baked strategy can be refined along the way, but zero progress occurs if you never launch. Owning this fact strips away the shield that perfectionism provides. You shift from waiting to refine your blueprint to actively building and improving it in real time, which in turn fosters a more agile mindset. Flexibility in your approach helps ward off the excuse that things aren't going exactly as planned. If you remain rigid, a minor setback can feel like a catastrophe and tempt you to quit. When you design your plan with room for adaptation, unexpected obstacles become signals to adjust rather than reasons to abandon your effort. Perhaps your timeline shifts by a few days, or you outsource a small portion of the work. Each instance of troubleshooting this way brings you closer to seeing problems as solvable rather than final. This resilience gradually becomes part of your identity, someone who doesn't fold under changing conditions, but instead recalibrates and pushes forward. Cultivating calm in the face of pressure is another skill that transforms excuses into progress. Many times, people default to delay because panic convinces them they need more time or extra preparation. By practicing simple stress management like controlled breathing, a quick mental break, or a short walk, you diffuse that sense of overwhelm. Once you're calmer, you see that taking a small step now is far more productive than waiting for anxiety to vanish. Over the week, these steady, calm-driven actions compound into visible movement, precisely because you didn't allow tension to morph into procrastination. Focusing on your why can slash the power of excuses. If you keep your core motivation in plain sight, maybe it's helping your family, building a certain career, or honing your creativity, each tempting rationale to push things off seems weaker by comparison. You can ask, does skipping this task align with the vision I have, or does it undermine it? This quick inquiry can jolt you back to action, reminding you that your deeper purpose outweighs a fleeting reason not to try. This tie to purpose is powerful enough to slice through mental inertia, especially when you capture that purpose in tangible form, a note on your wall, a meaningful quote on your desk, or an image symbolizing the outcome you seek. Although accountability partners and external structures are valuable, self-reliance and pushing through resistance is vital. Sometimes circumstances won't provide the perfect ally or a firm deadline. In those moments, the discipline you've cultivated through consistent small wins becomes the internal engine that keeps you moving. You recognize that waiting for someone else to hold you accountable can become its own excuse. Instead, you decide that you are the final check, the person who will or won't transform intention into real work. This acceptance of personal responsibility short-circuits a common delay tactic, blaming outside factors for your lack of follow-through. Carving out a weekly review session where you track how you handled excuses can reinforce this self-driven approach. Look at each goal you set. Did you meet it, or did you rationalize skipping it? If you find a pattern, maybe mornings slip away because you linger in bed, or evenings vanish to unplanned social calls, you plan specific countermeasures for the coming week. This might mean setting an alarm for a slightly earlier rise, or blocking certain hours in the evening with a do not disturb approach. Over time, these small course corrections remove the typical pitfalls that feed your excuses. What remains is a steadily improving environment where your schedule, mindset, and goals align. It helps to treat excuses like signals of what might need extra attention. If you repeatedly say, "I don't have the skills," that's a clue you might need some training or a quick study session before proceeding. If you often claim you're too tired, you might need to revise your sleep schedule or your diet so you have the energy to tackle big tasks. By interpreting excuses as hints rather than final barriers, you shape a proactive approach to each obstacle. You stop viewing them as brick walls and start seeing them as call-outs directing you to a solution. Not only does this lead to tangible progress, but it reframes your mind to see every challenge as potentially solvable. When frustration or discouragement appears, the temptation to revert to old habits spikes. Perhaps the progress you hoped for doesn't materialize as fast as you planned. In that vulnerable moment, a stack of reasons to postpone emerges. What's the rush? It's not working anyway. But if you hold on to the knowledge that meaningful change often takes longer than expected, you can push through. Each day of effort lays another brick in the path, even if the final structure is still out of sight. Patience, combined with determination, eventually brings breakthroughs that excuses can't hold back. A key insight is that action breeds clarity, while overthinking often feeds excuses. You might not know all the steps or the ideal approach, but by doing something, a partial experiment, a single phone call, you learn more than any amount of speculation can reveal. Each mini step illuminates the next move. Conversely, when you stay stuck in planning mode, you give yourself room to say, "I need more time to figure it out," which can spiral into open-ended delay. So whenever you feel uncertain, remind yourself that a small, potentially imperfect action is usually the fastest way to gather the insights you need. Taking real action this week doesn't demand a total overhaul of your routines. Often it's the cumulative effect of a few decisive moments, where you skip the usual excuse, choose the harder path of doing the task, and let that pattern repeat daily. By the end of the week, you see tangible results: a proposal drafted, a new habit started, or a crucial discussion finally had. Those results bring a jolt of motivation, and you realize how much the daily excuses were holding you back. Realizing you can sidestep them fosters confidence. Confidence then loops back, making it even easier to keep action at the forefront. The journey from excuses to execution is less about raw talent and more about redirecting your mindset. By identifying common rationalizations, crafting a plan that accommodates real constraints, and maintaining consistent accountability, whether through friends, personal logs, or internal discipline, you move swiftly out of the realm of maybe someday into I'm doing it now. That transformation, which can spark within mere days, sets the tone for a life driven by conscious effort instead of passive dreaming. Action becomes the norm and excuses fade, replaced by a steady momentum that upholds your intentions, clarifies your priorities, and delivers results you can see and build upon. A sense of perspective can further reduce the appeal of excuses because it places your immediate tasks within a larger storyline that you truly care about. Sometimes the mind fixates on short-term discomfort, forgetting that small sacrifices today pave the way for longer-term satisfaction. By stepping back and imagining how your actions this week tie into a vision for your life, be it personal freedom, creative fulfillment, financial stability, or service to others, you remind yourself that each fleeting hassle is part of a grander picture you've chosen. This wider view often injects patience and determination into the daily grind, because you see that every chunk of effort means one more brick laid toward a future you've consciously envisioned. Yet the concept of short-term gains should not be overlooked either. While the ultimate outcome might lie months or years away, finding small rewards or markers of advancement keeps you from drifting. The pride of finishing a chapter of a personal project, or noticing that a new routine has boosted your energy levels. You can track immediate changes in your environment. Maybe your workspace becomes tidier or your daily schedule more relaxed because you tackled lingering chores earlier in the week. By spotting these near-term wins, you nurture a consistent appetite for action, fueling the will to press on even when the ultimate goal still lies beyond the horizon. Guilt can become a subtle barrier, masquerading as a push to do better, but often leading to the same inaction. If you constantly berate yourself for not doing more, you might slip into a negative cycle where you feel too defeated to make any progress at all. A gentler yet firm approach, acknowledging you want to improve without beating yourself up, allows for healthier motivation. You can observe, I didn't achieve everything I wanted today, but tomorrow is a fresh chance, rather than I always fail, so why bother trying? This balanced perspective lets you own your shortcomings without letting them define you, ultimately breaking the chains of inertia that guilt often forges. Your environment can be molded to reinforce action. Suppose you're aiming to read more. Stashing a book in a visible spot might remove the excuse, I don't have any reading material nearby. If your goal is to exercise daily, placing workout clothes where you'll see them first thing in the morning can push away the claim, I forgot to prepare. By making the path to your priority as frictionless as possible, you reduce the micro barriers that feed excuses. Even labeling certain items or areas with short reminders can anchor your intentions. Instead of waiting for the perfect cue, you're shaping the world around you to spark execution at just the right times.